Huh? I filled up the fridge with beers. There's only this much left. One day, when inviting a neighboring family over for a barbecue, the beer that was supposed to be plentiful in the fridge was found to be nearly gone. My husband Anthony, socially adept and competent outside the house, is quite strict just with our family and easily gets upset over minor things. I tried to stay as calm as possible and addressed Anthony, telling him frankly that we were about to run out of chilled beers. Upon hearing this, Anthony, who had been in a good mood from drinking, instantly turned furious. His anger triggered, Anthony said, "Serving guests warm beer is disrespectful. Don't show your face again." Taking advantage of the fact that we were out of sight, he forcefully grabbed my arm and started walking in the opposite direction without saying a word. I had a bad feeling, but raising my voice would ruin the cheerful atmosphere, and resisting could escalate the situation, so I had no choice but to follow quietly. Reluctantly, I followed Anthony as he pulled my arm. Then, Anthony opened the door to a dark storage shed and pushed me in. The storage shed on a summer day was as hot as a sauna, with incredible humidity, so I immediately ran towards the exit. However, Anthony quickly closed the door and used a long-handled broom as a bar to prevent it from opening from the inside. "Open the door!" I pleaded several times, but there was no sign of Anthony opening the door. "Reflect on your actions in here for a while." With that, Anthony left, laughing villainously as if he were a character from a movie. My name is Evelyn. I live with my husband, who is a sales manager at a major real estate company, and our 20-year-old daughter. My husband, Anthony, is 57 and I am 55, so we are close in age. Originally, I also worked at the same company as Anthony. We had what you might call an office romance. Anthony was everyone's dream guy, and I never thought he was in my league, but thankfully, he proposed, and we started a family. When we first became a family, I remember feeling ticklish from being envied by people from all around. At first, I was over the moon and every day was filled with happiness. However, as we got used to living together, Anthony's true character began to show. Our daughter, Nora, graduated high school and is now attending a fashion college, commuting by train early every morning. Seeing her study what she loves, looking lively and happy, makes me look forward to her future. That's why, for the sake of my daughter, I prioritized living a peaceful life day by day. Our family lives in an area where many families from the same company or related companies reside, thanks to the housing allowance from the company, which means we have many acquaintances around. In times of trouble, it's great that we can quickly help each other out, but for better or worse, news travels fast. Our family, in particular, gets along well with Dylan's family, who live 2 doors down and are colleagues of my husband. Like us, they are a family of 3, and their daughter, Stella, being the same age as Nora, has been close friends with her since childhood. Dylan, the husband, is always polite and never fails to greet us during routine activities like taking out the trash. Even though he's the same age as Anthony, his character seems unbelievably nice. Lillian, his wife, is a year younger than me, and we go shopping and on outings together like friends. She works as a legal assistant and is a dependable sisterly figure, often giving me advice. Of course, I've brought up Anthony before, but I've always wrapped the conversations in layers of discretion. Honestly, it's too embarrassing to talk about with anyone. I truly appreciated Lillian's presence when our daughters had a small misunderstanding. When deciding on their futures after attending the same school from elementary to high school, there was a conflict. Initially, they both pledged to pursue fashion design and worked hard on exam preparations, but Stella decided to switch to cosmetology at the last minute, which made Nora feel betrayed, leading her to stop speaking to Stella. Seeing Nora struggle with accepting Stella's decision and hating herself for it, all I could do was watch. Lillian facilitated a discussion that allowed both girls to fully express their feelings, resolving the discord. Her calm mediation, listening, and ensuring things didn't get too heated, was truly memorable, almost as if counseling was her calling. Even though their paths diverged, respecting each other's dreams might have deepened their friendship. Stella, like Nora, commutes to school early in the morning by train and seems very busy. Occasionally, when their departure times align, they ride their bikes together to the nearest station, making me grateful to Lillian for preventing their friendship from souring. As a result, they are both aiming for similar jobs, so we, as mothers, are secretly hoping that one day they will work together. It's just a fantasy between the two of their mothers, kept secret from them. Aside from Dylan's family, we only greet other company-related families, so I'm not fully aware of how many live nearby. Having a good relationship with Lillian satisfies my social needs. However, there are several events a year that I can't say that about. Where Anthony invites his company-related neighbors for a barbecue or tea time. Due to his role as a sales manager, Anthony often leads the gatherings, usually at our home. Anthony's vanity and impatience mean I constantly have to be on my toes, which is exhausting, but it's become a tradition we can't easily stop. Last year, when we held a simple party in the winter to celebrate the new year, we had to open our home to cook and entertain, which left us feeling quite tired both physically and mentally. Other housewives offer to help, but Anthony's mood becomes visibly bad because it doesn't look good to let customers help, so I have no choice but to decline, which is another factor that builds up fatigue. It's ironic that Anthony, admired as a supervisor at work, shows his selfish and authoritarian side only at home. And now, with a barbecue planned for the end of May, I'm dreading the workload and the heat. The guests bringing their own drinks and food that would be shared would definitely lighten my load, and Lillian suggested it once, but Anthony, wanting to show off, wouldn't hear of it. I've learned it's easier to keep the peace and not upset Anthony by objecting, so I stay quiet. It's just a few days of hardship, after all. The barbecue is quickly approaching. Anthony has tasked me with ensuring everything is prepared perfectly, but perfect is daunting. As what constitutes perfect for Anthony can fluctuate wildly. Sometimes, he'll suddenly deem unacceptable what he previously approved, or vice versa. The most reliable method is to have him check everything in advance, but even that's no guarantee. When I mentioned going shopping for supplies, "I'm busy with work, so it's all on you. Don't you dare embarrass me," he said and went out. Since the number of attendees varies, we always check who'll be joining the barbecue in advance. Luckily, this time it seems only Dylan's family will be coming. Knowing their preferences makes planning the menu and drinks easier and lifts my spirits a bit. Considering the temperature, I need to stock the fridge to its limit with drinks to avoid running out. The family fridge was filled to the brim with beer. After checking with Anthony, he said, that should be plenty. Just to be safe, I also prepared some at room temperature, anticipating we might run out due to the forecasted heat. Since it's forecast to be hot, we might run out, so it would be perfect. On the day, I started preparing the main ingredients for the barbecue. Having cut everything into bite-sized pieces the night before, all that was left was to arrange them on plates. With the temperature expected to rise to summery levels, I made sure the air conditioning was on so everyone could cool off inside. Just as I was about to finish the preparations, the doorbell rang. Could that be Stella and her family? I'll go greet them. Please do. When Nora went to the entrance, she found Lillian, Dylan, and Stella, all smiles and decked out in sun protection gear, hats, and arm covers. A bit later, when Anthony made his way to the entrance and Dylan noticed him, he bowed his head politely. Thank you for having us. Anthony also smiled contentedly. make yourselves at home," and went back inside to grab a beer. After watching the adults finish their exchange, Nora didn't go back inside, but led the 3 guests around the side of the house to the backyard where the barbecue and canopy were set up. I handed Nora the plates of food through the large window facing the garden, and she skillfully arranged them on the outdoor table. The barbecue kicked off with the fathers and daughters happily sharing updates. Anthony and Dylan talked about company performance and sales results of their teams, occasionally mixing in jokes as they conversed earnestly. Nora and Stella were excitedly discussing the latest makeup techniques and recommending cosmetics to each other. While grilling meat and vegetables, I caught up with Lillian, who was enjoying her beer next to me. "Did you hear? The house around the corner just got a cat." "Really? A cat, huh? Nice." We chatted about trivial matters while serving the cooked food onto everyone's plates. When Stella said, "Auntie, no eggplant for me, please," Lillian promptly responded, "Don't be picky, eat everything." Ah. Seeing Stella reluctantly try the eggplant made Nora laugh. I thought this barbecue, being among close friends, would be a pleasant time. But soon after, I'd realize reality wasn't so sweet. Once the barbecue and beers put Anthony in a good mood, he demanded, "Bring more beer." I went to get more chilled beer from the fridge, only to face an unexpected situation. Despite having filled the fridge with beers, there were only a few left. I wondered when so many had been taken. Maybe the beer was consumed faster than I anticipated while I was busy preparing the food. The weather was hot, and the conversation was lively, so it couldn't be helped, but Anthony surely hadn't noticed. Yet, I knew from past experiences that once he realized we were almost out of cold beers, he would undoubtedly blame and lash out at me. Thinking that putting the remaining beers in the fridge now would at least be better than keeping them at room temperature, I moved all the remaining beers to the fridge. Then, trying to remain calm, I approached Anthony and said, "Honey," informing him straightforwardly that we were about to run out of chilled beers. Anthony's face, which had been jovial from the alcohol, instantly turned to anger upon hearing my words. Taking advantage of our location out of sight from the barbecue, he forcefully grabbed my arm and began walking in the opposite direction without saying a word. A bad feeling washed over me, but I knew raising my voice would only spoil the mood, and resisting could make things escalate, so I had no choice but to follow quietly. Reluctantly, I followed Anthony to the front of a storage shed on the opposite side of the garden. When we reached the shed on the opposite side of the garden, Anthony stopped and turned around, still holding my arm, saying, "Why didn't you keep restocking them?" Letting his emotions take over. Then, pointing at me, he said, "Serving guests warm beer is disrespectful. You stay out of sight now." He then opened the door to the pitch-dark storage shed and pushed me inside. The shed was sweltering like a sauna, with overwhelming humidity, so I instinctively ran to the door. However, Anthony quickly closed the door and secured it from the outside using a long-handled broom, preventing it from being opened from the inside. "Open the door!" I pleaded several times, but there was no sign of Anthony opening the door. Then, "Reflect in here for a while," he said dismissively and walked away, laughing villainously like a character from a movie. Panicking about the potential danger due to the heat, I repeatedly banged the door and shouted, "Somebody help!" But the likelihood of being heard from the shed, positioned far from the garden, was slim. To make things worse, shouting so much made me use up unnecessary energy, and I started to feel unwell. Having been grilling food without much hydration, I might have been on the verge of dehydration. Trapped with no hope of rescue, I wondered how I could escape. The darkness made my mood plummet further, and my breathing became shallow. It was too hard to stand, so I crouched down and leaned against a pillar, trying to escape the hot air as much as possible. With a gloomy feeling, I sit back down, hugging my knees. Huddled up, I lifted my face and noticed a water tank stored for emergencies at eye level. Grateful for any drinkable water, I hastily opened the tank and gulped it down. The water wasn't cold, rather lukewarm, but it was enough for me at that moment. It might help me manage for a bit, but I had no way of knowing how much longer the barbecue would last. With lingering unease, I closed my eyes. Meanwhile, Anthony, having completely forgotten about locking me in the shed, was enjoying a lively conversation and jokes with Dylan. I heard from Nora later that he was in a good mood and was making jokes, so I can kind of imagine it. Around 5 hours passed, and as the day began to fade, prompted by Lillian's suggestion, they started to clean up. Noticing Anthony's pale complexion, Lillian expressed concern.
Is something wrong? You look pale.
To which Anthony replied, "It's nothing," with a strained smile and quickly walked away from the garden. By then, Anthony must have been overwhelmed with thoughts of me locked in the shed. Intending only a short lesson but realizing hours had passed. Fearing the repercussions of his actions, he hurried to the shed. Tentatively, he removed the broom that was blocking the door and slowly opened it. But upon fully opening the door, he found no sign of me. Puzzled and concerned, Anthony switched on the light, only to see an unfamiliar woman standing with her back to him. Startled by a sudden, unexplained presence on his property, he exclaimed,
"Ah! Who are you?"
However, there was no response from the woman. Becoming increasingly angry at the woman who doesn't respond or turn around no matter how many times he calls out to her, Anthony approached the woman and patted her on the shoulder.
"Excuse me."
Shockingly, the woman's head fell off and rolled to the ground. Paralyzed with horror, Anthony collapsed to the floor, speechless and immobile from the shock. As he sat, frozen by fear, he suddenly heard the door close behind him. Confused, he quickly realized he was now the one trapped inside the shed. Panicking, he rushed to the door.
"Open the door, please!"
His plea for help echoed from inside, but then, from outside.
"You reflect on your actions there."
Lillian's voice must have been heard. Not knowing where I had gone or what was happening, Anthony was now the one trapped in the shed. Actually, Lillian had noticed my absence during the barbecue. I had often confided in her and had told a bit about Anthony's behavior. Feeling uneasy about not seeing me around, Lillian decided to search the property. Fortunately, Anthony and Dylan, being in high spirits from the drinks, didn't notice her leave. She informed Stella and Nora before starting her search. Finding no sign of me inside the house, she headed towards the shed opposite the garden, noticing a broom unnaturally propped against the door. Approaching with a bad feeling, she sensed someone inside. Knocking, she asked, "Is someone there?" Hearing my faint response, she hurriedly removed the broom, opened the door, and rescued me. Observing my weakened state, Lillian, deducing Anthony was to blame, took me to her house for safety. After she cooled me down and gave me water, she asked to me share what had happened as much as I was comfortable with. After hearing what had happened, Lillian thought of a way to get revenge on Anthony, and when she returned to my house, where they were still enjoying the barbecue, she briefly explained to her daughters about me, and then told them how she felt and how she wanted to get revenge. Both Stella and Nora agreed with Lillian's desire to get revenge, so the three of them went to Nora's room to have a strategy meeting and sort out the situation, leaving their husbands in good spirits. Nora told me that Anthony would often lose his temper and get hard on me if something didn't suit him, and that he would often lock me in the closet or storeroom. I'm sure Lillian was shocked to hear something even worse than what I had discussed. It's common for people to have a facade, but the extent of Anthony's duplicity was hard to accept. Regaining their composure, they decided the revenge should utilize the girl's skills. The plan involved combining Stella's hairdressing practice mannequin head with Nora's dressmaking mannequin to create a seemingly real figure. The key was setting the head to easily fall off, anticipating Anthony's impatient handling, likely resulting in a fright, especially with alcohol involved. They adorned the mannequins with wigs and fabric to enhance the human appearance, then set it up in the shed. Though the figure ended up taller than me, it might add to the fright. As a final touch, they placed a wide-brimmed hat on it, leaving Stella and Nora hidden outside. Lillian returned to the garden, suggesting cleanup, then followed Anthony to the shed and closed the door behind him. Anthony, unaware of the plot, couldn't understand why Lillian had locked him in. Continuously, he pleaded,
Let me out!
Lillian returned to her house, brought me along, and asked Dylan to join us in front of the shed, gathering everyone. She then informed Anthony that she was aware of how he had treated me, and demanded he apologize in front of everyone. Furthermore, she stated that until he confessed to all the unjust treatment he had subjected me to, he wouldn't be allowed out. Reluctantly, Anthony began to confess his outdated, authoritarian behavior as a husband, which surprised Dylan the most. It was hard for Dylan to believe that Anthony, who was perfect at work and liked by everyone, could be oppressive and lash out at home. Dylan stood agape, speechless. After Anthony finished his confession, Lillian made eye contact with me and then opened the door. Anthony, drenched in sweat, stumbled out, "I'm sorry," and bowed his head to me, apologizing. However, the looks from those around him were icy. Even Dylan wore an expression of disappointment. Looking down at Anthony, he said, "I had misjudged you." And he left. Stella also expressed her disdain.
Uncle, you're the worst.
Leaving Anthony unable to lift his head. Nora and I could only watch the entire scene unfold with indescribable expressions. Having never seen Anthony bow to anyone, I was predominantly bewildered. Lillian, as if to add insult to injury, suggested,
"Maybe I should call your company about this."
Anthony, panicked, quickly looked up and pleaded,
"Please, anything but that."
Seeing Anthony genuinely remorseful made me feel sorry for him.
"Let's leave it at that,"
I said to Lillian and started walking to the garden to clean up. This signaled everyone to resume their cleanup tasks. That night, the three of us gathered around the table to talk. I filled the glasses we always use with water and handed one to each before sitting across from Anthony.
"Go ahead,"
I prompted him to speak with a look. Anthony, still hanging his head in shame from displaying such a pitiable state in front of everyone, remained silent initially. After taking a sip of water, he spoke feebly. "Please don't tell the company. I'm up for a promotion. I'll give you the house, and you can do whatever you want with the rest. Please." I wasn't ready and couldn't reply. I was a little shocked that he could abandon his relationship with us so easily. After Anthony said those words, he wandered off somewhere with his head down. Now that Nora and I are alone in the house, I notice that my heart feels lighter. Although worried about where Anthony had gone, the relief of not sharing the same space with him was more profound. Nora, who had been quietly listening, noticed my eased tension and softened expression. "Mom." She looked straight into my eyes and said, "You've been putting up with this all this time, haven't you? I'm already 20, you don't have to anymore. I just want you to stop living a life of endurance." Perhaps Nora found it painful to watch me simply endure. Fearful of Anthony's anger being redirected towards her if she spoke up, I had remained silent, doing my best to bear it. Considering this, I felt both shameful as a mother and deeply touched by Nora's concern. I decided to divorce Anthony and continue living in the house with Nora. The next day, After seeing Nora off, I headed to the law office where Lillian works. Surprised by my prompt action, Lillian smiled understandingly when I explained Nora's encouragement. The lawyer at the office agreed to handle the paperwork and other practical matters after I shared what Anthony had said and our feelings. I intended not to escalate the situation, agreeing not to disclose Anthony's actions to his company as he requested, aiming for a settlement in the divorce that would include compensation and the house. After calling Anthony to discuss the divorce, he agreed without objection, allowing us to settle the divorce amicably. Now, the divorce is finalized, and thanks to the compensation and the house from Anthony, my immediate living situation is secure. However, supporting our life going forward is challenging, so I decided to start working in real estate administration, a field suggested by Lillian. I don't think it will be a problem since I was in an office job when I was working as a company employee. Seeing Nora's smile become more frequent certainly makes me grateful for Lillian, who provided the push I needed at that crucial moment. Being freed from a life of enduring Anthony's anger has truly been a blessing. While I haven't been too concerned about what became of Anthony, rumors have quietly circulated in our gossip-loving community about his lost promotion and subsequent dismissal. Whether true or not, we've kept out of it, especially since we never reported his actions at home to his company. Anyway, today I have an appointment to go out to afternoon tea with Lillian for the first time in a while, so I'm busy getting dressed up. When Anthony was around, I tried to only wear clothes that I didn't mind getting dirty, so it's been a while since I've dressed up as much as I want. Excited, I head to the cafe where Lillian and I agreed to meet. The cafe, buzzing with a diverse clientele, boasts a lively interior adorned with fresh flowers. Meeting up, Lillian and I chose a breezy terrace seat and ordered from the stylish menu. Opting to share a cake set and selecting Earl Grey and Darjeeling teas, we chatted away until our order arrived. Lillian then shared something new.
Did you hear?
She began, recounting a story she'd heard from Dylan about Anthony's fate. It seems a company junior had unwittingly spread the word about Anthony's public apology on the day of the barbecue, catching the ear of the president. Known for valuing family, the infuriated president decided that no matter how competent, an employee who neglects their family doesn't belong in the company, leading to Anthony's dismissal. Lillian squinted her eyes a little and put her hand over her mouth, laughing.
We kept our promise, yet look what happened.
Thinking that divine punishment really does exist, I laughed.
Truly, walls have ears.
And took a sip of my tea, smiling with Lillian.
On my way home from work, my cell phone rang. When I answered the call, it was the police, telling me that my husband had been injured in a fire. My husband said he had a meeting with someone from work today. A fire while he was out? Surely it's not our home. Thinking this, I hurried home to find our house safe and sound. Feeling relieved, I had no time to relax. I asked my friend to watch my kids while I headed to the hospital. When I entered my husband's hospital room, he was asleep. Although I had heard he suffered from a fire, his burns didn't look severe. The room had 2 beds, and the other bed had its curtain closed. According to the doctor, my husband had some burns, but they should heal in a few weeks. The more serious issue was a broken spine from jumping out of a 3rd-floor window to escape the fire, which might leave lingering effects. On my way back to the room after the doctor's explanation, a nurse apologized for placing my husband in a room with a female patient. When I asked who the woman was, I was told that she was also a victim of the same fire, and they were brought to the hospital together. Where did the fire happen? Well, it's work-related, so I can't tell you. Just go home and bring me a change of clothes. Why should I? What do you mean, why? It's normal for a wife to take care of her hospitalized husband's needs. I don't know about that. You always ignore me and the kids when we're sick, so don't expect me to take care of you. That's a ridiculous excuse. While my husband was talking, the door to the hospital room opened. Someone I knew entered, and I was a little confused as the curtain to the other bed was opened. Seeing the person lying in the bed, I was speechless. My name is Amy. I have a family of 4 with my husband and our 2 sons, ages 3 and 5. I'm currently 30 years old and have been working at the company I joined when I was 22. My husband used to work at an IT company but quit about a year ago. The reason, he said, was to adopt a more modern way of working. My husband quit his job without consulting me, which led to an argument, but he wouldn't listen, insisting that freelancing will bring in more money. When I criticized him for not discussing it with the family, rather than worrying about the income, all he would say was, "Don't worry, our income will increase." After quitting, my husband started freelancing from home. At first, things seemed to go well, but he gradually began to slack off. He wouldn't get up until noon and seemed to spend the late nights playing games in his office. Whenever I asked when he was working, he always said, "I have a duty of confidentiality, so I can't discuss my work with you, even as my family," and never gave me a straight answer. Initially, his income was $2,000 a month, but has steadily decreased, and for the past 6 months, it has only been about $500 a month. I wouldn't have minded if he helped with housework with his low income, but despite being home all the time, he didn't do any housework or childcare. Not only did he never help with chores, but when the kids caught a cold, he'd say, "I can't afford to catch it too," and would leave home for a few days. When I got sick, I asked my husband to take care of our son because I was going to the hospital, but he would say, "Why don't you just take the kids and go to the hospital?" And he locked himself in his workroom. With no income, no help with housework or childcare, and not even showing concern for his family, my husband was becoming unbearable. I thought about getting a divorce since it seemed the burden was only on me, and he didn't appear to be a good father to our sons. However, I was so busy every day that I could only make slow progress on preparing for the divorce, and I spent my days feeling frustrated. During that time, my husband, who rarely left home, began to go out more often, claiming he had errands to run, and started keeping his cell phone with him at all times. I quickly noticed the changes in my husband and suspected him of having an affair. In the past, I might have been shocked by my husband's infidelity, but this time I secretly celebrated in my heart that I could use this to my advantage in getting a divorce. I tried to gather evidence of the affair to get a divorce on the grounds of my husband's fault, but it was difficult to obtain evidence from his cell phone since he never let it out of sight, so I gave up. I considered hiring a private investigator to take photographic evidence, but we were living on almost solely my income, so I had hardly any savings. Every day I worried about how to catch my husband in his infidelity, and I could feel the stress building up. That's when a turning point came for me. After work, as I was heading home, my cell phone rang. When I answered the call, it was the police, telling me that my husband had been injured in a fire. My husband said he had a meeting with someone from work today. A fire away from home? It couldn't be our house, right? I rushed home with these thoughts in mind and found that my house was safe. Although I was relieved, there was no time to relax. I hurriedly went to pick up my sons and called my friend. I asked my friend if she could watch the kids because my husband had been taken to the hospital in an ambulance, and after dropping my sons off at her house, I headed to the hospital. When I entered my husband's hospital room, he was asleep. I had heard about the fire, but his burns didn't seem too severe. The room had 2 beds, and the curtain was drawn around the other bed. As I was standing there in a daze, a nurse came in and told me there would be an explanation from the attending physician, so I left the room. The doctor said that although my husband had some burns, they would heal in a few weeks. What was worse was the broken bones. My husband had jumped from the 3rd floor to escape the fire, and the impact had fractured his spine with the possibility of residual effects. When I was told that there might be residual effects, the first thing that came to mind was that I should have divorced him quickly. I think I'm an insensitive person, but I couldn't even imagine taking care of my husband. As the explanation from the attending physician ended and I was on my way back to the room, the nurse apologized that my husband was sharing a room with a woman. When I asked who the woman was, I was told that she was someone who had been in the same fire as my husband and had been brought in together. Could it be that this woman was my husband's affair partner? I thought as I returned to the room and found my husband awake. Where did the fire happen?
Well, I can't tell you because it's work-related.
Seeing my husband hesitate, I became convinced that he had been with his affair partner when the fire happened.
Anyway, go home and bring me some clothes.
Huh? Why?
Why? You're my wife. It's obvious you should take care of your hospitalized husband.
Huh? I don't know about that. You ignore us when the kids or I are sick, so don't expect me to take care of you.
That's a ridiculous excuse.
As my husband was talking, the door to the room opened. It was Mr. Smith, the husband of my friend. Feeling a little confused to see someone I knew, Mr. Smith bowed to us and opened the curtain to the bed next to us. As the curtain opened, I saw my friend Mrs. Smith lying in the bed. I looked at my husband in surprise, and his face turned pale as he avoided my gaze. Ah, I see. It became clear that my husband's affair partner was Mrs. Smith, and I was too dumbfounded to speak. Mrs. Smith was a close friend among my friends, and she had even brought her child to our house to play. I had introduced Mrs. Smith to my husband at the time, so he should have known that she was my friend. I had told Mrs. Smith about my husband's recent coldness and my suspicion of his affair. I wondered what Mrs. Smith's intentions were when she listened to my story with a serious face, agreeing with me by saying, "I see." Was she trying to find out how much I knew about the affair? Suppressing my urge to confront my husband and Mrs. Smith immediately, I greeted Mr. Smith. "You're Mr. Smith, right? Your wife has always been a great help to me."
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit flustered.
"I heard your wife and my husband were in the same fire. He won't tell me where it happened. Do you know anything about it?" When I asked, Mr. Smith glanced briefly at my husband.
I'm sorry that your husband was also caught in the fire. The fire occurred at my house.
"It happened at your house? I didn't know my husband was visiting you." When I looked back at my husband, he was hiding under the covers. Excuse me, I have something I'd like to talk about. Do you have time?"
Yes, I have time.
I had a pretty good idea of what Smith was going to talk about. We moved to a nearby diner where Smith told me that he had suspected his wife of cheating for several months and was gathering evidence. He had once looked at his wife's phone and found a photo of her looking cozy with another man in her photo album. So now he had hired a private investigator to take indisputable photos of the affair. I told him that I had also suspected my husband of cheating for a while, but didn't know who the other person was. When I said I intended to divorce my husband, Smith agreed to help me, and we discussed our plans for the future. 2 days later, Mr. Smith and I went to the hospital together, and my husband and Mrs. Smith were still sharing a room. When my husband and Mrs. Smith saw us enter, their faces tightened. "I'm glad you both seem well. I came to your room the day before yesterday, but you were resting, so I couldn't talk to you. Are your injuries okay?" Yeah. I fractured my shoulder, so I need to rest for a while." "That's tough. You'll need money now, so I hope you recover quickly." "Well, our child is still young, too." "That's right. You'll have to pay child support, so you'd better heal up and start looking for a job." Mrs. Smith seemed confused and didn't understand what I was talking about.
Hey, stop rambling. You brought my clothes, right?
"I didn't bring them."
You're useless.
"I told you before that I wouldn't take care of you anymore. What I brought you today isn't a change of clothes, it's this." As I said this, I took the divorce papers out of my bag and shoved them in front of my husband.
Huh? Divorce papers? Are you planning to dump me because I might have lingering injuries?
"It's not because of your injuries. You said you had a business meeting the day you were taken to the hospital, right? So why were you at Mrs. Smith's house?"
Well, I didn't tell you, but Mrs. Smith is a business associate. We were discussing work at her house when the fire happened.
"Did you think that excuse would work? It's obvious that I know about your affair with Mrs. Smith. No matter how much you try to deceive and make excuses, it just looks ridiculous." As I said that, my husband's face turned sour and he defiantly retorted,
Stop nagging about a little affair. Don't make such a fuss over a single affair. What will you do after the divorce? Can you raise our 2 kids on your own?
"Of course I can. I've been raising them on my own all this time. You've never taken care of the kids, have you?"
I've played with them.
"It's only about an hour once every few months. The neighborhood fathers play with their kids' fathers more than you do."
Well, then it'll be tough with just one income. We've been living on 2 incomes up until now. Do you want our child to live in the hardship?
"It'll be fine. In fact, without your expenses, our lives might even be easier."
But I'm injured.
"So?"
If people find out you left a husband who needs rehab, your reputation will suffer. It'd be better to divorce me after I'm fully recovered.
"Because you are not someone who can stick to things for long. It's clear that you will give up on rehabilitation midway through. I can't wait until you fully recover. You have your lover to take care of, don't you?" Upon hearing this, the husband glanced at Mrs. Smith and seemed to reluctantly accept the situation.
If you insist, I understand. I don't need you anymore. A bastard who serves divorce papers to an injured person. I'll divorce you. Now hand over the divorce papers.
As he reached out to grab the divorce papers, I kept them out of reach. "No way."
What are you talking about? You want a divorce, right?
"We haven't discussed alimony or child support yet."
You're trying to take money from an injured person? I need money for hospital bills and rehab.
"Oh, right. You better hurry up with rehab and start earning money to pay alimony. You don't have any savings, do you?" "Huh? No savings?" Mrs. Smith reacted with surprise to my words. My husband gave me a serious look and glared at me. You said you had 4 digits in savings. You said freelancing was profitable.
I meant I have enough income to easily save 4 digits. I'm just spending it as soon as it comes in now, but I can save up money quickly.
My husband desperately tried to make excuses. Although his current income was hardly $500 a month, I kept quiet because I didn't want to start a fight over it. Since they agreed to the divorce, I explained the future plans to my husband and Mrs. Smith. I told them that we had chosen a lawyer to consult about the compensation for the affair and that we would receive a certified mail from the lawyer later. Then we left the hospital room. As I returned home, I started preparing to move. While my husband was hospitalized, I went to thank the friend who took care of our children the day my husband was taken to the emergency room, bringing her a box of chocolates. I told my friend that my husband was fine, as he had been taken to the emergency room after the fire at Mrs. Smith's house, but was not in life-threatening condition. Moreover, the mom friend offered to take care of our children if things got difficult, so I also told her that I planned to divorce and move because of my husband's infidelity. Although I didn't directly mention that Mrs. Smith was my husband's affair partner, my friend seemed to understand. Of course, I intentionally made it obvious to my friend, but there were a few people who knew about my husband's involvement at Mrs. Smith's house fire, so the rumor would have spread even without me saying anything. Later, as we planned, I asked a lawyer to proceed with a divorce, but we couldn't easily decide on the compensation and child support amounts. At first, my husband boasted,
I'm a freelancer, so I can work from bed even if I'm injured. I plan to work all day because I'm free. I might even make over $100,000 a year. I won't take you back even if I become rich.
I had hoped that my husband's arrogance would make him pay the compensation and child support, but his hope of making $100,000 a year was shattered sooner than expected, and he started being reluctant to pay. He went from asking for an extension on the payment deadline to requesting a reduction in the amount, and eventually called me directly to plead.
Come on, $20,000 in compensation is too much. My infidelity is partly because you ignored me saying you were busy. Isn't $5,000 more reasonable? It's not that I can't make money. The clients who used to hire me stopped because I didn't meet the deadline once. It was just a few days late, so it's not my fault. I can't pay the compensation. If you really want the money, talk to those clients who stopped hiring me.
I've told you many times, talk to the lawyer about the compensation. I said just that and hung up the phone. After that, I asked the lawyer to tell my husband that we would go through mediation if the negotiations dragged on, and my husband easily accepted our terms. From there, everything went smoothly, and we received a lump sum payment for compensation and child support, finalizing the divorce. The Smith couple also divorced, and the husband gained custody of the children. The Smith family has 3 children, but it was revealed that during the affair, the wife left the 10-year-old eldest son to take care of the 2 younger siblings while she went out. After my son and I moved close to my parents' home, I heard from a friend that my husband and Mrs. Smith got remarried. The 2 of them are still living in the house where the fire occurred. My husband walks with a cane, and Mrs. Smith always has messy hair and a gloomy expression, making them look like an elderly couple even though they're still in their 30s. My husband has accumulated over $100,000 in debt due to alimony and child support payments, and Mrs. Smith, who is a stay-at-home mom, is being asked to pay child support for all 3 children, so together they must have quite a lot of debt. But I don't feel sorry for them since I significantly reduced the amount I claimed for my husband on the condition of a lump sum payment. My husband always blames others for his misfortunes, so I'm sure he's still doing that now. I felt refreshed after finally getting away from him. However, I feel guilty for making my 2 sons suddenly separate from their father and friends. At first, they were both bewildered in the unfamiliar place, but now they have become friends with the neighborhood kids and are having fun. On weekends, my parents come to visit and play with my sons, allowing me to have some time to myself. Since my husband left, I now have more time, money, and peace of mind. Thanks to the extra resources, I can give even more love and attention to my sons than before.